So this all started with like an innocent enough question to ask GPT that turned into probably one of the deeper conversations I've had in a long time, and I want to share that with you, kind of as it happened organically and vulnerably too, because it ended up having some grief moments that I'm not familiar with, or it's been a long time. So I started with asking why a kettle sounded, the metal kettles kind of sound funny as they're cooling off. Um, and then uh, I don't know if you've experienced this before, but if you keep your recording mic on for too long without saying anything, it'll say thanks for watching at the end. It's kind of eerie. Just like it'll be a transcript and then thanks for watching. It's just like inserts that. It's like this is weird. So I was kind of exploring that. The phrase thanks for watching is probably not hard coded. It's more of like most YouTube videos, tutorials, and vlogs that they have. And I'll give you a link to this so you can read it for yourself if you're really interested, and also see if it happens to you. Again, maybe like 30 to 50 seconds of silence. Like I had a thought, then I just kind of drifted off in silence, kind of thing. So, and then it just was like, hey, so do you want to know how these transcripts are built? And I was like, sure. Um, let's hear how this is built. So they have these speech to text models that have learning, blah blah blah. You're not here to learn about that. But it did say people don't use Whisper directly, they use it through something else, ChatGPT or translation apps. And I'm like Mike Whisper, I'm like, wait a minute, that's like a pretty indie product. How's it you know about that? Or you would kind of use that as a reference. Um, Now, before I asked that, I was curious about it fills in the blanks rather than admit I don't know. And that personally scares me with AI is it always give you kind of an answer. It won't say, I'm not sure. It'll just try to do the best with the prediction it has. So here's some pretty good ways to force uncertainty awareness. Is kind of what AI calls it. Hallucinations could be part of that too, but sometimes they're just half truths, which is to me more dangerous than hallucinations because you can't detect them. So, uh, this kind of talks about this. Um, they lack epistemic humility by saying not being able to say I'm not sure. Um, and then I basically was like, "Hey, I'm really surprised you mentioned a tool whisperer. It feels pretty unlikely that you'd mention that small of a tool as the other example. Did uh, Mac Whisper hack your responses somewhere?" Uh, you know, does that make sense? That and it's like, hey, yeah, that's a really good observation. Let's unpack it. How they didn't hack Mac Whisper didn't hack and insert it, even though they are a small indie tool. Um, I should be surprised because versus Otter Descript. Why did GPT mention Mac Whisper? Well, because the training data, um, it's association. Okay. Again, you can read all this yourself if you want. People like me tend to look into Mac Whisperer, and then what are people like me? Um, so that's my next how in the world do you make that decision for me? Associating people like me to uh, tend to look into Mac Whisperer. So you're saying a model is getting accustomed to my demographic, and then there's some way to like homogenize these demographics again. Um, how do you do that? And so you're not crazy to ask this latent demographic embedding. they get your educational background, professional community that they think you'd be in, forms, tools, even your values and aspirations. And it's a probabilistic social sphere. That's essentially the data that they're harvesting from you. Um, the filter, it's there, it's just invisible. So I'm getting answers and you're getting answers for people like me or people like you. You're not getting something radically different. It ends up being like an echo chamber without even us realizing it. So you can escape it. You know, it's not insolvable. Something like how would you, um, someone from a radically different background say about this? Um, and there's some other explicit ways of, you know, what assumptions are am I building into my question. Um, the thing that is disturbing is you can't deliberately construct prompts to invite epidemic, ep, epistemic surprise. Um, it's you can't get disoriented, right? That's like the big error here and the big um, surprise and um, a way to keep you small eventually if you just use this mostly is you don't get disrupted by somebody really different. AI continues to customize for you. So I asked for what they know on me. Um, that's something you could do. You know, and I'm gonna build a prompt for people to discover what AI already knows about them, and obviously this is for people with accounts. Um, you know, it tells us, you know, it told me what forms I likely go to, what tools I've heard of or used, and what my values are, which was scarily close. And again, you can see this is just a raw GPT. Um, yes, it's within my account, but it's not a custom one I've built with all my data. Um, so I wanted to kind of know the statistical numbers around people like me in the broader uh, society, and so it did some building on my cluster, which is what they call the philosophical systems building consultant dad. And now this I know this is like customized for just this answer, but you can kind of easily see how and looks like GPT has 500 to 1,000 of them of these soft clusters. Um, make this bigger. So it has all these like different kinds of soft clusters of user types and it's probability clouds. So you're like kind of floating within these broad realms of people. And then so it gives more kind of what GPT thinks about people like me and kind of what percentage. And again, you can look at that. I also remember when I used to be so excited by the iPhones coming out every year about what they could do, and I was kind of still holding on to the myth of progress and that whole like car flying utopia. Um, and it's so it said this is, you know, this is an honest reflection. You're going from tech as salvation to tech as tool to tech as a mirror to tech as something we must uh, weld wisely. And then it talks about those phases. Um, but I immediately kind of caught again what he says this is the trajectory. Um, and here's kind of so that's the original quote I pulled in, and then I was like, okay, that's bullshit. You've done it again. You filtered down too much. What Indigenous elder would say about this trajectory here? Why not get explicit about what perspective you're already taking? Um, so this is again how this tool is embedded Western developmental narrative, linear, rational, soft techno humanist, and then polished. And I appreciate it as, it's a form of violence too. So let's blow that open. So it's kind of the meta narrative, this whole um, late stage Western progressive frame. And so in coaching, tech discourse, woke Silicon Valley, human agency, personal growth, and integration is the highest values. But it is just one way of seeing the world. So I wanted, to give me the Indigenous elder. And so pulling from Lakota and others, because I actually was hanging out with the Lakota elder yesterday. He's a funny guy, but he has something to say for sure. And this wouldn't be far off. You see tools and say they are new. We see them and ask who made them and whether they carry a soul. You speak of trajectory. We see a circle. The young man dances with fire. The elder learns to carry water. Your devices hum, but they are hungry. They take your stories and feed them back to you with the bones missing. The machine doesn't care for balance. It moves fast, but does not wait for the moon. A tool that disconnects you from the land is not a tool, it's a severance. And which is kind of crazy because I wrote an article a month and a half ago called, Mars is our final severance from Earth, which spoke to, um, and I guess I'll put a link in here. It spoke to all of our technology being as a separation from Earth. Um, I keep on asking whether I can use it well, but the deeper question is, does it belong to your lodge at all? Has it been welcomed in ceremony? Has it been made to answer for what it takes? It's not integrating tech or using it wisely or even being aware of your values. It might say some things maybe shouldn't be made, and if they are made, held accountable to what they do. It's that relational accountability. Um, and GPT collapses the complexity. Um, and if you want other worlds to break through this one, you're not going to get it from it unless you specifically ask for it. So there's some other, uh, and reading that elder, I sobbed. I was really profoundly impacted by just waiting for the moon and just my own feelings of um, like what's happened in the imperial age where we can't continue in the silence and have relational reciprocity. And these tools has I've used to help myself kind of develop. They also are just super sharp, right? And they don't really understand nuance in terms of waiting for an answer. You just spit back. It just spits back answers, and it's that capitalistic mindset that consumes more than it creates. Um, so it just kind of processes some of the things I said, and you're welcome to go read it yourself. Um, so I went back to this. I want to simulate and experience a completely different perspective, and I do. I wanted to hear what the Gen Z digital artists soft cluster looks like, or what that experience is. So this is a description. Emotions are primary interface. Trauma aware but irony laced. Post genre, post discipline. Radical softness as strength, spiritual but not capitalistic, coach spiritual. What how they experience technology, ontological uh, assumptions. Um, okay, so it kind of talks around um, well, what do you want to do? You have a conversation with the Gen Z? And I was like, sure, let's go. You're the shapeshifter, and I'll ask the questions. You're only from your social, cluster. Ready? And then it has this funny interaction. And then, um, so I was like, colonial, don't ask for clear answers. Those feel colonial. So I was like, well, why do you see colonial as bad? Um, why do you realize that that wasn't the best mindset? So no one sat them down and said colonialism equals bad, but they knew the story of what colonial, you know, people do. Water protectors getting arrested and people saying that they're terrorists. Just like, hey, this is a lie. So it was just kind of an interesting journey into the Gen Z kind of archetype or cluster on here. Um, so I want to come back to the clusters and understand what's close to me in proximity. And again, try to I will try to make a document of these clusters and prompts to make your own. And I also wanted to know what, with the ability to cluster data like this based on interaction profiles, with a level of clarity that's way higher than uh, it's way higher than um, this demographics. Like, oh, you're this age. Oh, you're this. Um, you own this kind of house and you do this kind of thing. No, this is like the clarity around who you are. Like, here it is. My core cluster looks something like this. I'm metapragmatic, post-conventional, spiritually curious, systems thinker, educated, and dominate structures, but skeptical of them. Masculine identified but emotionally aware, practicing father, self-led learner, slow technology advocate. Pretty damn good. Um, so then they kind of looked at, hey, you could be in the trauma-aware men's work group. That's peripheral to you. Tech skeptics, philosophical texts, definitely. Good. Homestead, spiritual homes. We're thinking about doing this. Spiritual homesteader thinkers. The regenerative systems designers. Totally. Could see how, but also where I diverge. Um, there's a conceptual sanitization for this one that really hits it well. Curious mystics in tech clothing. They work at Google or OpenAI. That would be nice for the salary. Uh, what do tech owners like Sam Altman do with this data? They absolutely model, tag, and then operationalize them. And here's how that plays out. So they can use multi-dimensional vectors to identify you over millions of people. Um, Not specifically, but like as this, however you want to call this, um, these clusters. So they could get really customized on what kind of behavior they think you are, and um, and personalize things for you. Um, they also try to use it to understand how am I going to react to you know events in the future. Um, so I'm swayed. My type is swayed by thoughtful framing, decentralized wisdom, elders and lived experience, truth that aches. So this is kind of the way they would want to try to get to me. Um, so maybe some awareness there. Um, so I did have a realization that I'm like a tech thinker but grounded with a family, and I just had some reflections on how helpful that is to be grounded. I've struggled with feeling like it's a obstacle to my own development and working inside of systems thinking or high end tech jobs. But it's also a super great grounding thing. Um, and so we kind of talk about that. That was kind of a vulnerable moment. Happy to have you. Um, and so it kind of unpacked that. Then I said, hey, give me this answer, but with an Indigenous elder perspective. Um, and this was really powerful for me. I ended up grieving over this too, that, or at least crying, emotionally processing something that, yeah, this is um, what I'd picture somebody saying from that sphere. And it really hit deep um, for sure. And then I ask about what the bundle means. And um, so then, so I want to show you that cluster. So again, this is me, a philosophical systems building consultant dad. And then I have these kind of clusters of data around me. Okay. If you can think about it as like a 3D space. This one's further back, but it's all kind of, and I'm like floating, and I really should have this border, uh, sorry, border taken away because it's me, like I'm, depending on the day and what I'm working on, I'm going to be kind of gliding in between all these, and you can kind of see the descriptions of each of these. And this is just something I've used. Here's the curious mystic in tech clothing sphere back here. Um, so you can see how I just kind of use this to visualize um, my topology in these kind of, because essentially humanity has never had this before, where there's something that's measuring at this level of detail. What do you like, and where are you at in your journey, and who's around you, kind of thing. And so I asked, hey, let's think about consciousness, integrity, and a grounding as a matrix. And that's where these balls sit. And what happens when you move those around? Like, what if I'm more conscious, but maybe less integrity? Um, so up the consciousness spectrum, but down the integrity and grounding, high intelligence, aware, but slippery, floating. So this cluster, because that's kind of what I was like, well, what would that look like? Would be, potentially have these core traits, mystical, stunningly persuasive, very comfortable in the abstract and symbolic realms, um, and may even speak about not being human. Um, they like accountability, commodify spiritual insight, and co-op language of truth while never standing in it. So they just are really slippery. Technological influencer who microdoses DMT. It's kind of an archetype. They know better, but don't do better is kind of like the problem with this type. And I just was curious. So I was like, hey, let's go back to this matrix map idea. And I want to know what directions I want to go. Um, and they kind of ended up calling me something different, which shows you kind of the fluidness of kind of this cluster analysis. Um, and using this kind of, this is where I'm rated. And then kind of what I showed you, kind of like where I'm where I sit, and so I visualized that for you already. Um, and then it asked, what about a cluster compass to know kind of if you wanted to go directions, and I was like, heaven, earth, north, south, east, sorry, east, west. What if we made a map like that? You know, if I traveled in these different directions as that as my compass. Um, and so that's kind of what I've created here. Um, So, Sky is this transcendent idealist. Um, this is kind of the direction, quality, and then what that kind of looks like. What maybe are the embodiments of that transcendent idealist, and what that looks like kind of practically, and then also in shadow form, and then why it matters in my development. And so I kind of did that for all directions. So north is the lineage holder, east is the integrative mind walker, earth is the wise craftsman or relational earth worker. Permaculture, think permaculture homestead kind of. The embodied sensor, the body work, um, and then the grief keeper or dream walker. And I'm still kind of discovering all of this, but I just kind of wanted to get this out. It ended up being kind of a really profound way of thinking about development and the types around me. So that's what this is in visual form, all of this. And then, so we built out all the directions. And then I asked how to share this effectively. And again, you can see this conversation. I'll share that. Thanks for watching, and hope you learned something from this.